Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk. I'm with Dave Frank. My name is Eric Kirk. We're going to talk national news of the day. The first thing we are going to discuss is President Biden went to Europe last week, made speeches in Poland and in Brussels. Of course, the big news is he's calling for Russia to be removed from the G20. He's got 500 million more in military and humanitarian aid coming out of his discretionary budget to go to Ukraine, calling for a lot of other issues and leadership. He's calling on the Europe to have more sanctions against Russia, and basically was trying to play the role of leader of the free world, and had a long meeting with Zelensky. But what was the news for the right-wing media? Well, three gaffes, as they are referring to him. That was the story, and they want to basically hammer on whether or not he is competent. One was he went to Poland, actually pretty close to the border. An interesting thing was that whether or not it was coincidence, there were missile strikes in Liev, which isn't far from the Polish border, right as he was there. But he spoke to some soldiers, and as he was speaking, he was talking about Ukrainian soldiers, and he says, and when you see them, you will see, and apparently it's been taken as when you go to Ukraine, and then the headline was, oh, are we going to invade Ukraine? Are we sending troops to Ukraine? And then he also made reference in another speech, I think back in Brussels, as to, if Russia uses chemical weapons, we will respond in kind. That being taken as to we're going to respond by using chemical weapons. The White House saying what it said was we would respond with we would come up with a proportionate response. Of course, that's not being what in kind, I guess, literally means, but this again being seen as a gaffe. He's too old, shouldn't be in there, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, the last thing was he made kind of an off-the-cuff remark, said, for crying out loud, Putin needs to be removed. And of course, this was being thrown out as a policy change, that this is going to be, the CIA is going to be working around the clock to somehow get him removed from power by instituting some type of coup or assassination attempt. And unfortunately, the White House started trying to walk that back, and that became the headlines. He's walking it back, and of course he stood up and said, "I'm not walking it back." It was a statement of saying that I believe he should not be in power, but it was not a policy statement. But of course, the Republicans, right-wing media, and even some of the general media have sort of hyped on that this was a very dangerous thing to say. And so anyway, these are the three gaffes. And the question is whether or not, in fact, these were gaffes, whether or not this should be the story, as opposed to Biden goes to Europe and has put together and apparently is seen as the leader of an incredible coalition putting together sanctions that were unimaginable a month ago. And is pretty much seen as having put pressure on a Russian economy that is on the verge of collapse, and having provided military assistance that is seen as instrumental in having basically stopped a Russian invasion against a much inferior force. Dave.
Yeah, I like the way you sort of presented each of the three supposed gaffes, in part because they sort of sequentially ramped up to one that got what I would say is the most press. But so from my perspective, one of the things I was, I guess, I don't know, raised or trained or way of thinking that evolved is I do try to give people the benefit of the doubt and try to figure out what they're trying to say. But in our political climate, that is just obviously that's a stretch for a lot of folks. They've got no interest in that. It's in their own best interest to find weakness or find points of contention, points of difference, points of leverage, and then ways to undermine people's credibility ultimately is where that path leads. So generally speaking, I think where the coverage that these three statements got depends on the source and depends on the news source itself. So again, I'm speaking generally, but right-leaning news, I saw. I actually watched Tucker Carlson just because I figured that would be a great proxy. I watch him relatively regularly just to see where that line of thinking leads to. Some people say that's not great, but I like to get a full spectrum of thought, right? So he was basically really hammering home of mental infirmity, saying, well, you're talking to soldiers and you're telling them they're going to go to Ukraine when they're not going to Ukraine. That's bad. And people say, what happens if there's chemical weapons? And you say in kind, that means you're going to use those weapons. And when you say I don't want this person to be in power, then you are, really undermining a strong established precedent where regime change is not legal internationally, and it's something that's not talked about domestically because it's not something that leaders are supposed to do or say. So the right was really all over saying like, Article 25, like try to have him thrown out as mentally incompetent, which of course would never happen, but it's a way to exacerbate that tension of language. And so left-leaning news to a certain extent was more trying to put a safety net under the misrepresentation or misinterpretation of the words, or even the fact that he misspoke. And in a sense, maybe there were elements of language that you could be critical of, rightfully so. But the left seems to, mainstream / left was saying he was a courageous man of conviction. So, for example, with soldiers in Ukraine, it was a pep talk for the troops. It was a way, rallying the troops around the tragedy of what we're experiencing in Ukraine. And the chemical weapons, well, yeah, like you said, a proportionate response. If somebody slaps you, you don't bring out a shotgun. You respond proportionately. So in kind, you say, well, maybe I'll use a weapon that's not and it's not necessarily an escalation, but it's not necessarily the exact same weapon. So the left gives them the benefit of the doubt there. But when it comes to the power, I think a lot of what folks were saying is, well, what he really meant was that Putin shouldn't have the power to influence his neighbors and influence his region the way he is because of his deeds show he the world ought not tolerate that. But from my perspective, and there's a long way to get there, but I try to provide a moderate, nuanced reading. I think he did effectively, or at least tried to effectively, use the bully pulpit, using his conviction and his passion, and maybe it was slightly off base in several readings of it, meaning it's controversial because it did lack clarity. At best, at best it lacked clarity. At worst, it contradicted some established doctrine. So there's the fact that we're all talking about it, I think, is good, because we are talking about, hey, there aren't troops going into U.S. troops currently planning on going into Ukraine, and we are not going to use weapons of mass destruction, which is nuclear, chemical, biological. We don't do that as a country, and we are not engaged in regime change. So the fact that we're talking about it is actually an exercise that's beneficial to everybody. Unfortunately, Biden is getting chopped at the knees over it.
And the fact of the matter is if you look at the speech, it's obviously an emotional statement. It's in there, and he's not saying anything that anybody doesn't agree with. We all wish that Putin wasn't in power. Anybody who's sane wishes that he wasn't in power. He has forfeited his right to lead a country by the way he has acted. I mean, since 2014, quite frankly. I mean, for across the board. So he's not saying anything that any person except maybe Tucker Carlson disagrees with. That is absolutely the case. I'm not even absolutely convinced that it was an accident. He's saying I'm not walking it back because I actually think he wants to actually put that idea out there. Not that the U.S. military or even intelligence is going to be doing anything, but I think he actually wants the idea out there, hoping that somebody in Russia will take that up. I really do think that he has it out there. It's probably not appropriate, not protocol. He knows better than that, but he's probably just tossing it out there as something that as a moral idea. Maybe that's playing with fire. Maybe that's not something you would do. But if it was Hitler, would anybody have had any question about that? I don't know. I'll give you one real quick final word on that, and then we got to move to the next topic.
Yeah, I think that, like I said, I think that the passion and the bully pulpit were his choice to make. He's the president, and in theory, it's somewhat controversial, but it's beneficial in the end that we have these conversations.
Friends, I'm proud to greet you from Ukraine, from our capital city of Kyiv, a city that is under missile and airstrikes from Russian troops every day, but it doesn't give up. And I have the honor to greet you on behalf of the Ukrainian people, brave and freedom-loving people who for 8 years have been resisting the Russian aggression. Those who give their best sons and daughters to stop this full-scale Russian invasion. Right now, the destiny of our country is being decided. The destiny of our people.
All right. The next topic is, well, the hearings are over. They got pretty contentious. I actually think they got pretty ridiculous. We talked about it a little bit last week, and they got even more ridiculous after we left. And I think it really came down to about 3 or 4 Republicans. We're talking about the Ketanji Jackson hearings, and they were turned into a circus by Cruz, forgetting the name, the woman from the South.
Marsha Blackburn.
Blackburn, and 2 others, and basically they brought up critical race theory. They brought up trying to force her to explain rulings she made in individual child porn cases, which would have been really inappropriate because it would have brought out very specifics that would have embarrassed the victims in those cases. If she had done it, would have been completely unprofessional. She could not have done that. Hawley was the worst possibly, but it was absolutely inappropriate for them to do this. And they made it a circus, and it's been this way. And of course they justified it by saying, well, you did this to Kavanaugh. And actually they were the same people who made the Kavanaugh hearings a circus, because nobody was yelling except for them. In the Kavanaugh hearings, they were the same ones who yelled. Kavanaugh yelled. And as there are a lot of jokes about this. When do we get to learn whether or not she likes beer, right? Does she get to cry and talk about how much she likes beer? I mean, it just was an absolute circus, and she kept her composure throughout and explained it, and her approach, her history, and the question is whether or not the Republicans are ashamed of it. I noticed that not many Republicans joined in this, and I noticed that even the Republicans who are saying they're not going to vote for her because of the politics of it are not citing all of the stuff that Cruz and Hawley brought up, about that. They're citing, she didn't state her judicial philosophy, which should be originalism, but she didn't say what it was. And it's like, first of all, judges shouldn't even have an overreaching philosophy like that anyway. And originalism means different things to different people. The 2 actually distinct philosophies are strict construction or the living document, and both of them claim to be originalism. There's a difference. They tend to think that strict construction is originalism. It's not. Madison was against strict construction. That's why he put the 9th Amendment in it, and we can get into a whole discussion about that, about how if I tried to enumerate every right that should be covered by the Bill of Rights, I'd be here all day. I mean, it was just but at any rate, they're going to, McConnell has come out against her and the rest, but they carried on, and most people, I think it was like 58% of the Americans support her being a Supreme Court justice. I think that's like 1 point below Roberts, who was like the highest in recent history. It used to be that 80 or 90%, it would be like 80 or 90 votes in the Senate would pass these, but they've become so partisan. My prediction last week was there's going to be about 56 or 57. I'm pulling back to 53 because it looks like some of the people I thought were going to vote for it probably aren't. Collins confirmed today that she will be voting for it, so that guarantees that she's going to be in. I expect Murkowski will probably vote yes. Haven't heard from Sinema yet, but Manchin confirmed that he's voting, so that pretty much guarantees the Democrats. I'm pretty sure Sinema will go along. I'm thinking probably Romney, even though he stayed out of the last one, but his responses to some of the comments made by Holly Cruz suggests to me that he probably might, or at least be a no vote, a non-vote. I'm not sure, but this should be bipartisan. She's her qualifications are undisputed. Nobody questions them. She's brilliant. And anyway, Dave, what are your thoughts?
We talked about this at length, I think, last week. But what has evolved since we spoke last, and you framed this issue as was their conduct? Did it reach the level? Yeah, did it reach the level that it's going to come back and hurt Republicans in any way? I don't think that. I don't think that too many people are going to be swayed by saying, "Oh my God, look at how the decorum has devolved, and look at how I forget which senator called it." And I can't curse, but basically behaving like jerks. I won't say the exact curse. I don't know if we're allowed to say it or not, but really behaving like jerks. One of the Republican senators said that about themselves. Tom Cotton. Yeah. So there's some degree of perspective. So I can say it maybe. Jackassery. Okay, cool. Yeah. I wasn't sure. But yes, that's generally, like an example of this, and I'm not just throwing around slurs. Senator Cruz went on and on and on, and then immediately after being obstinate, he went and searched his Twitter feed to see how it was trending. Someone took a photo of it over his shoulder, and it just shows that it's about talking points for them, trying to score points, trying to make sound bites for maybe get invited to other shows to speak. But generally speaking, it turns out that Judge Jackson is currently in queue to be the most popular Supreme Court nominee in history since modern polling, with 2 out of 3 people in the country supporting her. As we talked about, she's highly qualified. She's going to pass, probably party line votes plus 1 or more. People have said possibly Murkowski, like I think you said, possibly Mitt Romney, but definitely Susan Collins. So it really is less about her judicial aptitude and temperament, and more about the politics of it. But I did get some polling numbers real briefly. I think it's interesting. And apologies, I don't have the source. I think I linked through from a New York Times article, and I don't remember the exact polling company, but this one's the one that people have been talking about. So Republicans, only 29% support, 71 oppose. Independents, 67 support, 32 oppose. Democrats, 95%, 5 oppose. So that you could probably expect that about 2 to 1 one way, 2 to 1 the other way, and then 19 to 1 the other way. But this one is one that I thought was fairly interesting. Support or oppose based on self-described ideology. I thought this one was telling. If you're very conservative, it was 27 to 72, so that's like 3 to 1. Somewhat conservative, it was pretty even, 45 to 54. Moderate, 69 to 30. So by the time you get to moderate, you're already talking like basically 2 to 1 the other way plus. And then somewhat liberal is 9 to 1, and then very liberal is like 19 to 1. So it's really where you stand depends on where you sit, and that kind of plays out in the polling numbers. So in order to have an overall 60+% approval here, it's because for a reason. I mean, it's
Right.
not that many people really want to buy into the grandstanding.
Yeah, they were very careful. They did not say affirmative action. That would have really backfired if they'd said that, because she is eminently qualified across the board. That was why she was chosen. There was no question that she's qualified. But the critical race theory, trying to hit her on the child porn things that well, they probably understood, but that they're hoping a lot of American people aren't going to understand. And I think you're right. I don't think there'll be a lot of pushback on him, because Graham always whines and carries on in Congress, and Cruz does too, and Hawley. Everybody knows he's a nutcase, and his supporters love him for it. So, I don't think there'll be a whole lot of pushback, and all the rest of the Republicans were careful to not let themselves be seen that way. So they'll do like Cotton did. Yeah, I'm going to vote against her anyway, but yeah, shame on those Republicans for acting that way. And that's pretty much the way it'll go down.
So you're not going to answer my question?
No, I've answered your question, and my answer
You
is
haven't
I've
answered my
explained.
question. I'm sitting here asking you, and you're declining to answer.
Good.
Good. I understand.
Absolutely
Senator,
good. I hope you are.
To do.
Good.
Allow her to finish, please. There's no point in responding. He's going to interrupt you.
I love this country because I love the law.
Chairman refused to allow a witness to answer a question. You can bang it as loud as you want.
He was ambushed. How would you feel if we did that to you?
No, Senator, I didn't say versus.
That's exactly what you said.
To see the badgering of this woman as she's trying to testify, I thought was outrageous.
I'm sitting here asking you, and you're declining to answer.
I've explained how the guidelines work. Judges all over the country are grappling with how to apply this guideline. Do you have other questions for me?
Yeah, I do. I do.
I think we should recognize that jackassery we often see around here is partly because of people mugging for short-term camera opportunities.
Okay, well, speaking of the Supreme Court, very, very interesting. We live in very interesting times, because usually the Supreme Court is pretty much kind of separate from the rest of politics. I mean, I don't know, maybe there have been times in American history where you've seen them this involved, but rarely do we see this kind of involvement this way. But Clarence Thomas, who was at the center of one of the most controversial nominations in our history, he was, of course, accused of sexual harassment in another circus hearing way back when, and he his wife is caught up now in the January 6th hearing. A bunch of her text messages have come out. And apparently she's, very much is supportive of the January 6th, was calling for Republicans to be out in the streets, and it was very much a promoter of the big lie. And it's called into questions a couple of his dissents, in one which he was the single dissent in terms of turning over some records to the January 6th committee. And I'll let you get into more detail about that, but there have been calls for his impeachment. Ocasio-Cortez was basically calling for it yesterday. And although I doubt that's going to happen, we know that there simply aren't enough votes in the Senate to happen, regardless of whether a Republican is guilty or a Democrat is guilty. You just cannot get 2/3 of the Senate to do that. I don't think that what happened to Nixon is ever going to happen again, as long as politics are the way they are. But the Republicans have been scrambling to try to come up with a response to this. This is really embarrassing to them. Thomas has stayed quiet, of course, as he always does, but he's not going to say anything. Who knows what his beliefs are? And naturally, he doesn't necessarily have to believe what his wife does. His wife could be a little crazier than he is. That can happen. But but the Republicans finally came out with a few statements today. Some of them are saying misogyny or attacking his wife. I believe McConnell came out and said, "You're being a bully. This is this is bully politics," but nothing really defending her. Nobody's defending her. Nobody's saying she's right for doing this, or that her involvement is justified. They're trying to minimize it. They're saying she has a right to say and do these things. Yeah. But that's about it. And they're, of course, worried that maybe she's going to be involved more. I mean, she's sending texts to Mark Meadows, who's at the center of this thing. Dave?
Yeah, this is a fascinating case because obviously I don't think there's anybody I've ever talked to that thinks that you ought to be held responsible for the things that come out of other people's mouths. You're judged on your own deeds. So Clarence Thomas's guilt, I guess, is by association. But let's for a second separate him out from this. There were Bob Woodward, famous Washington Post journalist, and Bob Costa from CBS. They released 29 emails occurring in the month of November that were pretty damning, showing. And I don't mean to impugn Ginny Thomas personally, but if I looked at the portfolio of things that she talked about and they came out of anybody's mouth in the world, I would think this person is somewhat attached to very extreme views and not fully rational views. But we know that she believes them. She's got a track record that goes back many years. And so the question is, was she involved in planning and supporting and petitioning for a criminal conspiracy to undermine a legal procedure for the peaceful transfer of power? And I think she ought to be judged on those merits. And I think that the January 6th committee will be looking at her role as a trying to influence the outcome.
But Dave, what about that? What about his dissent, which he had no explanation for? It was an 8-1 ruling about turning over the records, which we're not quite sure of whether or not those particular records, and we don't know if he knew it either, were what revealed some of her involvement.
So you anticipated my next thought, which is judging him on his own merits, which is the ethical practice of being a judge, and making sure that you recuse yourself when there's a conflict of interest. And now there's no legal requirement for Supreme Court judges to follow the same ethical standards of other judges. And I think that this incident will lead the country to demand that in the future, which if nothing else comes of it, that's one thing, is to force people like Clarence Thomas to recuse themselves when there are obvious, blatant, and damaging conflicts of interest, like in that case you described, and all January 6th cases going forward, where his potential conflict of interest is just way too close to the fire. Many of the Supreme Court justices have recused themselves. I've seen coverage of lots of examples of recusals, like Justice Breyer, when anything that comes out of the Ninth Circuit, because his brother's a Ninth Circuit judge, he just recuses himself because it's his brother is an attorney, is a judge, a federal judge.
Jackson has said that she will recuse herself from that one involving her school that she's on the board for. I mean, she's actually pledged to do it ahead of time. Yeah. I don't believe that that Clarence Thomas has recused himself from anything in his whole career as a Supreme Court justice.
You're the best, because you've anticipated my next thought, which is Citizens United. And so Ginny Thomas's connection to Koch Industries, dark money groups, and lawyers affiliated with that organization and its many tentacles. We're not going to go into, these are documented relationships. And Citizens United was a case that Clarence Thomas, his vote was in favor of the precedent that did pass. And Ginny Thomas is intimately related with organizations that benefited from it. The information is out there. You can find it. Like I said, I'm not here to impugn anybody's reputation, but there are very close relationships that show that quite possibly Clarence Thomas should have recused himself from that case. It just doesn't seem like that's something that he would ever do without an ethical demand to do so. And I think that's I think that's the big takeaway, is that we ought to hold all the Supreme Court justices to the same standard that we hold public figures in general, but judges most certainly.
Absolutely. I mean, and the fact that he's never done it. I mean, almost every other Supreme Court justice has at one time or another recused themselves from something, but he has never done it ever. He just doesn't see it as anything he needs to do. He feels like he's either so objective that he can just divorce himself, from it and be independent. But he really isn't. And it used to be that he never used to ask questions, so nobody ever knew do his thinking. In recent years, he started to. I don't know if he's just finally loosened up and let his hair down, or if he's starting to get older and wanting to interject more thought into. I don't know, but it's he's starting to reveal a little bit more. And a lot of scholars say he's kind of extreme in some of his views. I mean, it's he's brilliant. There's no question about that, but he's extreme. I mean, it is a kind of extreme view on some topics. I mean, his view of original intent, and I talked a little bit about that in the last one, is that the Eighth Amendment should be construed by the values of the time, such that the fact that we had people in stocks publicly, to be shamed in public stocks as a form of punishment in the 1700s means that we should be able to do it today, because that's when the Eighth Amendment was written, right? So it wasn't cruel and unusual then, so it should not be a bar to it now. Whereas the living document says that, it's whatever is cruel and unusual at the time. I mean, that's extreme. What's the point of it then, right? It doesn't have any effect at that time. Well, he's saying that we should be sticking to the values of that time. That's extreme.
So if you take that to I know we're running out of time in this segment, but the originalist doctrine, that the extreme version that you articulated, it just doesn't account for the complexities of a modern and changing society, and so it's very limited in scope. It's intentionally limited in scope because then the government doesn't have the power to regulate, etc. So there are lots of reasons, and it gets back to what I said about the comms related to President Biden's gaffes when it comes to Ukraine. Where you stand depends on where you sit, and if you don't want the majority of the people to be able to influence the power brokers of a society, then you restrict their ability to use the government to regulate, and that's a core issue that permeates a lot of this thinking.
Yeah. All right. One last comment is that his whole actions ethically here have me convinced more than ever Anita Hill told the truth. And we've got two sexual predators on the Supreme Court. Sorry, that's what I believe. Next topic.
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. So help me God.
Okay, next segment. We've got lots of January 6th news. A judge has basically, in ordering Eastman to turn over his records, he's been fighting it in court. We've talked about how Eastman, who is one of the architects of the whole strategy, is kind of weak as it was to basically overturn the election, had a number of records. They've tried to fight the January 6th committee based on privilege, on executive privilege, attorney-client privilege, and judge finally has said, nope, you're turning them over, and in his ruling basically stated there's a good chance that former President Trump is guilty of obstruction of Congress or attempted obstruction of Congress, which is remarkable. For the judge to say that, probably getting fed up with the whole thing. This has led to a number of issues. I don't know if those were the records that were released that led to yet another revelation, is that the phone logs, I'm not sure, I don't think that Eastman's records were the phone logs. I'm not sure, but it's kind of reminiscent of Nixon's missing 18 minutes of tape. We've got between 7 and 8 hours of phone logs of no phone calls made from the White House. But we know he made phone calls because other people have it. We've got a list of people, McCarthy, Pence, everybody who he was on the phone with. And so the allegation is that he was making burner phone calls. He claims he doesn't know what a burner phone call is, but Bolton says, oh, he really does know what a burner phone is. And of course, burner phones are phones that you buy in a store. You've got with a set amount of hours, and nobody can trace who you are, or what. They're used by drug dealers and gangsters. I mean, this is the president of the United States we're talking about. Anyways, it's all surreal. But let's go back to the Eastman situation. Dave, I'm going to turn it over to you.
To learn a little bit more, like we've seen and we've talked about Eastman before. He's a lawyer, relatively renowned and well respected, or at least until present. And so he's the person who drafted the theory. He was hired by the Trump administration to draft the theory that the vice president had the authority to deny the acceptance of some of the state's electors, and then in theory, by rejecting enough electors, that the person that Biden would take power, that would leave Trump in power. And it's a little more complicated, but not that much more complicated.
Right.
And then everything sprung from that. The whole Green Bay sweep, as it were, if they were going to figure out a way to kind of overwhelm and overpower the peaceful transfer of power. Ultimately, Peter Navarro famously publicly said, this was our plan, and we spelled it all out, and Eastman gave us the legal order, and we figured it out. So why does this matter?
And Navarro is facing contempt charges, by the way.
Exactly. For also him and Eastman to not, they've decided not to cooperate at this point, for the most part. But so why does it matter? Judge Carter, he wrote that Eastman and Trump, this is a quote, launched a campaign to overturn a democratic election, an action unprecedented in American history. A criminal act is not protected by attorney-client privilege. And this is another quote. Their campaign was not confined to the ivory tower. It was a coup in search of a legal theory. Another quote from Judge Carter. Based on the evidence, the court finds it is more likely than not that President Trump corruptly attempted to obstruct the joint session of Congress on January 6, 2021. So yes, it's not saying that Trump committed a crime. It's saying that for all appearances, there was a crime committed, and Eastman, for his part, does not get any special protections. His speech with the president, and I think not to keep going here on you, but I did watch this video. I'm going to give credit to MSNBC. They aired a clip. Lauren Windsor from Undercover actually went up to Eastman at a conference after Eastman had said, I'm kind of stepping back from ownership of this theory. I'm not going to continue to support and say it was a valid legal theory. I'm just going to kind of step back. But just less than a few weeks after that, he was on video claiming credit that his legal reasoning was sound. And then the person who did this undercover video, Lauren Windsor, she kind of was egging him on, saying, yeah, we're like-minded activists. And why don't you tell me, why didn't Pence do what you told him? Why didn't Pence do what he was supposed to do? And Eastman was pretty much a leaky bucket. He said, because Pence is an establishment figure, and the establishment Republicans are short-sighted, and they're afraid that Trump's destroying the party. When in fact, and I'm paraphrasing here, but when in fact Trump is destroying the inside the Beltway party and reviving the party in the hinterland, what they consider deplorable flyover country, what the insider GOP considers deplorable flyover country. Trump got ahead of the uprising in the hinterland. He did not create the uprising in the hinterland. He saw that it was there and he got ahead of it. And the establishment Republicans cannot tolerate that because they have nice, cushy livings inside the Beltway. Again, that's paraphrasing, but the video's out there. You can find it. He's basically saying out loud that Trump and his team really did intend to upset the apple cart here and seize power away from not just the potential incoming president, but to marginalize the establishment Republicans, and that Pence was part of that effort to that they thought they could get Pence to do it, but they weren't able to do so because he had really good lawyers that explained to him that he shouldn't do it.
And Dan Quayle. It was right. I know. Well, we don't have as much time left. So what about between 7 and 8 hours of missing? What was he thinking? Did he think nobody was going to notice this? I mean, and why?
Yeah. So this is just raw self-preservation, I think. And so one of the things, like you spelled out pretty clearly, is about 8 hours of time where they just said, nope, nothing happened. But there's all these people who received calls. So then the question is, like, where exactly did that happen? And so one example that I saw was that that came out was that if you go through the White House switchboard, it comes out with the standard first 6 numbers and then 4 zeros at the end. And so there was a call that went to Senator Tuberville, and it was Trump. It was either Trump or Meadow. It's not entirely clear. I think they said it was Trump, though. And he said, "Hey, is Senator Lee there?" And Senator Tuberville was like, "Here, I'm going to hand the phone over to Senator Lee." So they have at least a few people that got a call during that time period, and they're saying, "Okay, well, let's just look at this one. What phone was it on? Where did it come from? Did you use a disposable phone? Or was the record scrubbed of detail?" So so either way, it's indicating deliberate obstruction. So even if they only get a handful of these calls that they need to do a little bit more digging on, they're going to be able to get to the bottom of, well, was there a record that was scrubbed, or did certain staffers not comply with the requirement for public disclosure? Or was there something even worse at play? And they're going to be, this proves intent of a conspiracy.
But we know he talked to McCarthy. That discussion is famous. He was telling McCarthy, "Well, you're being a wimp," or whatever it was, and because everybody heard it, everybody around him heard it. McCarthy's admitted he had it. What's his name? The guy from Ohio in the Duck District. He's like been back and forth as to whether or not he's had phone conversations and when. But I think they've tracked him down. I mean, he's had all kinds of phone. Jim Jordan, right?
There you go.
Has had phone conversations with him. I mean, we know he called Meadows, on several occasions. The question is why, and what was he trying to hide with it? I mean, it boggles the mind as to why he thought he could get away with this, and maybe he just figured he was going to be in power and nobody was going to be able to question him on this. But it was just, I don't know. It's just bizarre.
So just look at human behavior. If you stay out past curfew and your parents are calling you, you just don't answer, right? You're just like, I'm just going to deal with it later. And then I think this is one of those instances where, like, if you're in the middle, if you're at the hub and spoke of a coordinated activity of this nature, the last thing you're going to want to do is document all the people that you talk to minute by minute and say, "Oh, this was exactly what we did." I just think it's human nature to deceive in light of what appears to have been happening during those 8 hours.
Right. This is why Jordan was nervous, because he knows it wasn't the White House phone, right? He knows you can see what number's coming in. He knows it's not a recognizable number. So he doesn't want to be tattling on Trump. He doesn't want to be the guy who does. So that's probably why he's nervous. Yeah. It boggles the mind. So there's probably people whom he called that we don't know because they're not officially on the record, who people didn't get to hear or whatever. It's bizarre. It's absolutely bizarre. We'll be talking about this in the future.
I don't think I've made mistakes. I mean, every time somebody says I made a mistake, they do the polls and my numbers go up. So I guess I haven't made any mistakes.
We showed up and we demonstrated that we would not have our voices silenced by a Republican Party that across the country had a singular intention on suppressing the right to vote.
Some Democratic senators seem to imagine they could just break the rules on a razor-thin majority. Nothing would stand between them and their entire agenda, a new era of fast-track policymaking.
The Republican Party moved very far away from reality. And the fact that you got colleagues of mine in the Senate who refuse even today to acknowledge that Donald Trump lost the election. How do you deal with that?
Joe Biden is the president we need right now. Battle-tested, forward-looking, honest and authentic. He has never forgotten who he is fighting for.
Okay, last segment. It's been quite a few weeks since we've talked about the redistricting. We're down to about now, as of today, 4 states that have yet to get their final maps in, although quite a few of the states are in litigation. But the Supreme Court has made it pretty clear they're not likely to overturn any maps before the current election. There is a lot of litigation of maps that may be overturned after after this election, so may not be for the full decade, and that's probably true of probably about 7 or 8 states, because there is gerrymandering going on all over the place. Not necessarily true of in-state decisions, however. There are in-state decisions pending possibly one in New York, for instance. The New York Supreme Court is now possibly going to be asked to look at that one in terms of state law. Well, one of the things that has happened is in Maryland, and I'll get to Maryland. In Maryland, we had an issue of this was the only Democratic state, blue state, to have been gerrymandered in 2010. Other than that, there was probably about 15 Republican states that did. But Maryland, of course, the first Democratic state to gerrymander, now we've seen a few more, sees itself is now the first state to actually see itself overturned by its state court. It, of course, has, like, I forget, 7 or 8 Democratic districts and 1 Republican. It could have actually gone as far as to eliminate all Republicans. It didn't go that far. Republicans sued under the state court, and I've got dogs behind me.
Yeah.
Anyways, I thought the door was shut. Somebody must have opened it, so I apologize for that. But at any rate, they are going to have to go back to the drawing board, and probably they're going to have to allow for at least 1 more Republican. So there's a Republican win there. However, overall, the Democrats have come out ahead. I surprisingly, Republicans were 538 for a long time was expecting Republicans to come out with like about 7 or 8 additional Congress people, and so far it's not working out that way. North Carolina, for instance, was supposed to come out ahead, but they had their state court overturn their Republican gerrymandered map, and with that, the state Supreme Court not only overturned their map, said no, that's gerrymandering, but they just cranked out their own map, and it actually favors Democrats, to where the Democrats have actually picked up a seat. So we'll talk about that more in the future. And I'm going to let you talk a little bit about these things, but I have some other quick news about Louisiana. Dave.
So the thing is, you brought up Maryland, and I think Maryland is just to reiterate what you said, it's 7 Democratic districts and 1 Republican district, and the fact that it's their deadline is actually today to pass this new map. The primaries are upon us. That's why I think some of these deadlines are so near to the current date. I think just one of the big takeaways there was that Maryland, the power is they have both branches of the legislature, and so it's one of those things where they were able to sort of max out their power, which I thought was kind of interesting. It didn't result in a particular pickup necessarily, but it just solidified their ability to make them much less competitive. There's basically only 1 competitive district in the whole state, so it's one of those things where it's expected, I guess. That's all I really wanted to say about that. And then the other thing is, like you pointed out, North Carolina. The fact that these judges are looking at these these panels are looking at these and saying that they're overly advantageous to the party in power, in this case in North Carolina, but the fact that the Supreme Court did not hear it, I think that's telling that the Supreme Court is for lack of a better word, endorsing gerrymandering as a principle that they're not going to find fault with. I think that's a big takeaway there.
Yeah, although it's only short term. They're saying we're not saying this for the long run. They just saying there's primaries coming up, so we're not going to be messing around. We want to make sure these primaries happen, but come back after the election and we'll talk about these things, because there are a lot of Republican complaints about Democratic gerrymandering that are going to them as well, and so they're saying, well, we may overturn some of these later. Don't necessarily think that these are safe for the long term. So there are a lot of lawsuits that are pending and waiting, but they will be dealt with after the election.
And just real quick, last week we talked about it, the fact that some of the Supreme Court justices have hinted that they think that the state legislature should be supreme, not the state courts. And so it could take the jurisprudence in a new direction.
It could, but a lot of it depends on how state law is set up too, right? I mean, North Carolina, the courts claim that the statutory law is set up to allow them to do that, right? So that might make it different from some other state, such as New York or Pennsylvania. It just really depends. But this was the state court saying, look, we got primaries coming up. We can't waste any more time with Republicans playing games like they did in Ohio, because Ohio right now has, the Republicans are having to do a third map, and they're expecting that they're going to play games with that one as well, right? And the North Carolina says, we're not messing around. We're doing another map, and it turns out one that actually benefited the Democrats, which they're almost like they're punishing the Republicans for, hey, you shouldn't have messed around to begin with, and now you're paying for it. I mean, it's like a slap. I mean, it really is hard. Real quickly, I want to point out that Louisiana has come out with its map. It probably will be under litigation because, like the last time around, you've got a black population that is 1/3 of the state, and yet it's all crammed into one of the 6 districts. Of course, you've got 5 Republican majority districts and 1 Democratic majority district, in which they do a snake district that encompasses Baton Rouge and New Orleans and snakes along that way. There's definitely going to be a Voting Rights Act lawsuit about that. They're not even bothering to try to get it in before the election. That will be pending for a later date. So that is happening, but there'll be a lot more news, and I'm going to get everybody caught up on what's happening in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Ohio in the future. But it's really hard with so much going on with the war and everything to keep everybody caught up on it. But it's but that's basically what's happening, is that you've got all of these lawsuits happening, and some of them they just have kind of given up. And it's interesting because it's not all partisan lawsuits. What's going on, for instance, in Wisconsin, in Michigan, is the NAACP and African American groups are suing the Democrats because they did rig it in favor of the Democrats, but the way they've done it, it's hurting African American groups. And that's it's benefiting Democrats, but not African American representation. It's actually costing them. There are going to be 1 fewer African American districts there. I mean, it's just in Texas, they instead of going for more Republican districts, we've talked about this before, they just wanted to lock in their incumbents and make them even stronger, make everything less competitive. And Democrats didn't complain because it protects their incumbents too, but except that it actually provides fewer opportunities for Latinos and African Americans. So that's the basis of those lawsuits. All right, that brings us to predictions. Dave, what do you got?
So this is something that just hit my radar, and I think we have more research to do, and we're going to see a little bit about how this plays out over time. But Greg Jacob, who was counsel for Mike Pence, people have now released publicly. There's articles out there. There's information out there that he was the lawyer responsible for in just a very short period of time coming up with a legal memo to give Pence a crash course on whether or not he had the power that he was being told by a full court press of Trump supporters that he had the power to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power. This lawyer turns out to be one of the, sitting in the key pivotal seats of hearing the lobbying from Trump legal team, but defending Vice President Pence based on his legal understanding of the role of the vice president. And my prediction is that we're going to see the January 6th committee has him as a star witness, both because of his conviction that Pence did not have this power and his presence at the other end of the phone, so to speak, immense pressure campaign for Pence to be involved. And so Jacob, I think, is that pivotal power position. He was a player at that key point and can really shed light on what actually happened and whether or not this was a conspiracy without legal merit.
All right. Okay, well, we'll see. Hunter Biden has been in the news lately. There was basically a straw man argument about the New York Times admitting the existence of the laptop. Nobody has questioned the existence of the laptop. What's been questioned was the relevance of it. But he has been in the news, and there is actually an investigation going on about whether or not there was appropriate foreign lobbying. Obviously, Trump has made news in the past couple of days calling on Putin to release dirt on it. I'm not seeing a lot of Republican condemnations of it. I'm really not seeing a lot of right-wing media coverage of him saying that. It's kind of interesting. But at any rate, it's in the news. But it is a serious investigation. I am going to predict, actually, that there may actually be an indictment at a certain point. Probably not for the Ukraine. I think that was very weak from the beginning because, first of all, when they revived the investigation, that actually could have hurt Biden more than helped him, but possibly for some of the Chinese activities. But I think the Republicans are going to be very disappointed because they're going to complain that the charges aren't serious enough and it's not going to be as sexy as they want. But I do believe there will be an indictment.
And just to add to that for you, Kazakhstan energy industry folks, there's tax avoidance allegations too about benefiting because of his connection to Vice President Biden at the time.
Yeah. All right. Well, that wraps up this show. We will be covering a lot of these issues. Until next week, stay informed and stay engaged.